The mother-in-law, carrying a lovingly prepared bento, witnessed her son-in-law being slapped at his company. Enraged, she slapped the perpetrator squarely across the face. Everyone stared in shock, wondering who this madwoman was, but the business card she presented in that instant was a death sentence that would plunge a man's life into despair. One crisp autumn morning, Mrs. Lim was bustling in the kitchen from early dawn, her movements surprisingly spry for someone past 60, and the aroma of food emanating from her nimble fingers warmed the chilly morning air. What she was preparing today was no ordinary meal. It was the first bento for her beloved son-in-law Kevin, who had been married to her only daughter Cheryl for just 3 months. Kevin was a truly upright and diligent young man. When he first brought Cheryl home, Mrs. Lim's heart was immediately won over by his kind eyes and humble demeanor. Unlike many young people nowadays, he knew how to respect elders, and above all, she could feel his genuine affection for her daughter, treating her like the most precious treasure in the world. He had graduated from a prestigious university and worked tirelessly day and night at a tech company with a name she found unfamiliar: Nexus Dynamics. While it pained her to see him work so hard, she also admired his resolve. His strong will to stand on his own 2 feet without any significant family assistance resonated deeply with Mrs. Lim. That's why she felt an even greater urge to care for him. The thought of her son-in-law constantly relying on delivery or convenience store meals made a corner of her heart ache. He needs proper food to keep his energy up. My Kevin shouldn't go hungry, she thought. Mrs. Lim personally selected the finest ribs, freshest seafood, and organic vegetables from the early morning market. The ribs, which had been soaked overnight to drain the blood, were marinated in a delicate sauce and then tenderly steamed in a pressure cooker. Plump abalones were pan-fried to a golden brown in butter. Bell peppers of various colors and mushrooms were finely julienned, and Kevin's favorite rolled omelet was meticulously prepared, separating the egg whites and yolks to create a perfectly layered, pristine roll. Finally, a sprinkle of black sesame seeds adorned the fluffy white rice. A contented smile never left her face as she meticulously wrapped the insulated bento box in several layers of elegant cloth. The joy of gaining a new son far outweighed any emptiness she felt after marrying off her daughter. This bento was more than just a meal. It was a mother-in-law's affection and concern for her son-in-law, a warm encouragement for the new family member. Mrs. Lim settled into the back seat of a black sedan driven by her chauffeur. Normally, she preferred public transport or driving herself, but today she had called for a car, cautious that the freshly prepared food might cool down or get disarranged. As the city scenery swiftly passed by the car window, she thought of her son-in-law's workplace. It was a company called Nexus Dynamics, located in a gleaming new building in One North, a hub for innovation. She had heard it dealt with cutting-edge technology, just like its name suggested. A smile naturally formed on her lips as she thought of her son-in-law striving to realize his dreams there. "So this is the company," she murmured. The chauffeur smoothly pulled the car up to a state-of-the-art building covered in massive glass panels. Mrs. Lim alighted, instructing the chauffeur to wait, and cradled the bento bag carefully as she entered the building. At the reception desk in the ground floor lobby, she gave her son-in-law's name and department. The staff member briefly checked before handing her a visitor's pass. "Mr. Kevin Tan is on the 17th floor. As she rode the elevator up to the 17th floor, Mrs. Lim felt an uncharacteristic flutter in her heart. Was she disturbing him while he was busy? But she soon shook her head. It was almost lunchtime, so it should be fine. She intended to simply hand over the bento and leave quickly. With a ding, the elevator doors opened, revealing a spacious office. Desks separated by partitions were arranged in rows, and numerous employees were busily typing away on their keyboards, their gazes fixed on computer monitors. Mrs. Lim tiptoed further inside, trying to locate her son-in-law's desk. She spotted Kevin's back near a window in the innermost part of the office. Mrs. Lim smiled, delighted, and was about to approach him when the scene unfolding before her eyes froze her on the spot. A man stood in front of Kevin, shouting something fiercely. The man, corpulent and dressed in an expensive suit, clearly looked like a superior. And the next moment, something happened that made Mrs. Lim doubt her own eyes. *smack times. With a sharp crack that sliced through the air, the superior's palm slammed hard against Kevin's cheek. It happened so quickly that a few nearby employees looked up in surprise, but then immediately averted their gaze back to their monitors as if nothing had happened. It seemed like a terribly familiar everyday act of violence. Kevin stood with his head bowed, his cheek still stinging from the slap. His shoulders trembled slightly, his fists clenched tight, unable to even straighten his head. He offered no excuses, no resistance. He simply endured all the humiliation in silence. The moment she saw this, something snapped inside Mrs. Lim's head. The warmth of the bento box in her hand vanished, instantly replaced by a cold rage that enveloped her entire body. Asterisk. My daughter's husband, this good upright boy, whom I consider a son, was being subjected to such an indignity. Asterisk. A furious anger surged through her, as if blood was rushing backward through her veins. Was this how a mother felt witnessing her cherished child being mistreated in public? Mrs. Lim hesitated no longer. She strode purposefully towards them. At the sound of her footsteps, the man who seemed to be the boss nervously turned around. He frowned, seeing a middle-aged woman approaching him with a murderous expression. Who is this auntie just barging in? Before the man could finish his sentence, Mrs. Lim shifted the bento bag to one hand and swung her other hand like lightning. Asterisk. Smack times A, sound far louder and sharper than before, echoed through the office. Mrs. Lim's palm connected squarely with the man's cheek. His bulky body reeled, and his glasses flew off, clattering to the floor. At the sudden turn of events, all the noise in the office ceased. Every finger poised over a keyboard froze, and all eyes turned to the scene. The man who had been slapped seemed not to comprehend what had just happened for a moment. Then a burning pain, coupled with a surge of humiliation, washed over him. His face began to flush crimson. "You crazy woman, who do you think you are hitting people?" the man roared, adopting a threatening posture as if to lunge at Mrs. Lim. Several female employees gasped softly, seeing the violent glint in his eyes. But Mrs. Lim didn't bat an eyelid. Instead, she looked down at him with cold contempt as if he were pathetic. There was no trace of fear in her eyes, only icy disdain and chilling fury. "How dare you lay a hand on my family?" Mrs. Lim's voice was low, yet the intimidation it carried was far heavier than the man's shouts pressing down on the office air. The man, momentarily overwhelmed by her presence, recoiled. Mrs. Lim slowly opened her handbag. From it, she retrieved a finely crafted, luxurious business card holder. She pulled a single card from the holder and lightly flicked it towards the man's face. The card fluttered, hit his chest, and fell to the floor. "Let's see if you can still talk after you've seen this." Enraged, the man irritably picked up the card from the floor. At first, he thought it was just a haughty auntie's empty bluff. But the moment he read the words on the card, all color drained from his face. Mrs. Lim Advisor to Evergreen Holdings. Evergreen Holdings, a massive conglomerate ranked among the top business empires in Singapore. And the name, Mrs. Lim. Not many people knew her name, but among the few core executives in the business world, it was spoken of like a legend. The hidden powerhouse who had built the company alongside Evergreen's founder, now retired from active management, but still wielding immense influence over the entire group as a major shareholder. The man's pupils shook violently, as if hit by an earthquake. He stared disbelievingly, alternating his gaze between the card and Mrs. Lim's face. Asterisk. This ordinary-looking yet profoundly elegant middle-aged woman was a being so far above him that he would never have had the chance to meet her in a lifetime. And if so, then Miss Kevin Tan, whom he had just slapped and humiliated. Asterisk. The man's mind went blank. Fear choked him, making it impossible to breathe. His shoulders, which had been so arrogant just moments before now, cringed pathetically. He began to tremble, holding the business card as if it were a burning coal. An incomprehensible groan escaped his lips. Breaking the office's silence, only the hollow sound of the man's teeth chattering echoed. Mrs. Lim watched him, her voice cold as she spoke. "So, you understand the situation now, do you?" That single sentence was like a death sentence. The air in the office became like a vacuum. No one dared to even breathe properly. All eyes were fixed on Mrs. Lim, on Mr. Chua, who stood before her trembling like a leaf, and on Kevin, frozen with his head bowed. The employees were bewildered, unable to fathom what they had just witnessed or what was about to unfold. Mr. Chua looked as if he was about to fall to his knees. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, and the business card in his hand was already damp with perspiration. Evergreen Holdings. Nexus Dynamics, the company they belonged to, was just a small, nascent subsidiary among Evergreen Holdings' many affiliates. To them, the title of advisor to Evergreen Holdings felt like a distant, almost mythical entity. Yet that legendary figure now stood before his very eyes, and he had just slapped the cheek of someone dear to her right in front of her. I'm sorry. I have committed a grave offense. Mr. Chua's voice cracked badly. He bowed so deeply, he almost folded in half like a piece of paper, repeatedly lowering his head to Mrs. Lim. The arrogant and violent demeanor he had displayed towards Kevin just moments earlier had vanished, leaving only a servile instinct for survival. I had no idea who you were. Please forgive me. Mrs. Lim did not bat an eyelid at his pathetic apologies. Her gaze moved past Mr. Chua, resting on her son-in-law, Kevin, who still could not lift his head. The clear red handprint on Kevin's face felt like a knife piercing her heart. A deeper sadness and regret surpassing her anger washed over her. Asterisk. Why had this kind, innocent boy endured such harsh treatment without saying a word? Times Kevin, Mrs. Lim called softly. At the sound of her voice, Kevin's shoulders flinched. He couldn't bring himself to look up. The shame and despair of being seen in such a state by his mother-in-law, who had even brought him a meal, was unbearable. He didn't know how to salvage this situation or what to say. He just wished this moment would pass quickly, that it was all a dream. Stand up. Lift your head. Mrs. Lim's voice carried a resolute strength. Kevin reluctantly and slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot and his lips were tightly pressed together. Mrs. Lim gazed at her son-in-law's face in silence for a moment, then slowly raised her hand and gently cupped his cheek. The warmth still radiating from his cheek transferred to her palm. It must have hurt. At those words, the tears Kevin had been desperately holding back suddenly gushed forth. They were tears mixed with all the sorrow, injustice, and despair he had endured until this moment. He quickly turned his head to wipe away the tears, ashamed of his unmanly display, but once unleashed, the tears did not stop easily. Mrs. Lim did not press him further. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Mr. Chua. Her eyes were now incomparably colder and more ruthless than when she had addressed her son-in-law. What is your name? Yes. My name is Chua Sung-ki. I am the manager of Development Team 2, Mr. Chua stammered, trembling. Mr. Chua, do you know why I came here today? No, I don't, truly. I came to bring my son-in-law a meal. I came quietly, hoping not to disturb him while he was busy, but I've certainly witnessed quite a show. Mrs. Lim's voice was laced with sharp thorns. At the mention of my son-in-law, Mr. Chua's face turned even paler. A low murmur erupted among the employees who had been watching with bated breath. Asterisk. Mr. Kevin Tan was the son-in-law of Evergreen Holdings Advisor Times. They watched the situation unfold, their expressions a mix of shock, dismay, and a subtle sense of gratification. Where did you learn such manners? Is it your parents who taught you to arbitrarily use violence against your subordinates? Or is it this company? I'm sorry. I am truly sorry. I momentarily lost my temper. What I just saw seemed very habitual and routine. Judging by the expressions of your colleagues, it wasn't the first or second time. Was it 2 https www.google.com/URL ça égale E, Q égale HTTPS, %3, A, %2F, %2F vertex SH, .cloud.google.com, %2F grounding API, redirect %2, FAUZYQGCQ, DCQ PFI, GMGR5 of TELF V, 2IRT27, FZRTOP7 ZPA, 9 Q0 EUDNGLQP, 2K0XYTVQ5, ViewKNM0 FSIDWBUOS, 7Y-REAB.2, JRIMP6S, R0 LMVQSY56 LCWY, 4 FZN1, YFQ5, IMUX NTL JGM-FUT, 6 DLQVKCS, %3D, %3D, at Mrs. Lim's sharp accusation, several employees involuntarily flinched and averted their gazes. In truth, Mr. Chua's abusive behavior and violence were an open secret within the team. Everyone knew, but fear of his power and retaliation had prevented anyone from speaking up. Mrs. Lim dismissed Mr. Chua as if deeming him unworthy of further conversation, and spoke to Kevin. Pack your things. Let's go home for today. Madam, but the project I'm working on. Kevin stammered in confusion. Regardless of the situation, he couldn't just leave work during office hours. but Mrs. Lim's intention was firm. Is that trivial project more important than your well-being? There is no work in this world worth enduring such humiliation. Her words carried an undeniable authority. Kevin hesitated for a moment but finally returned to his desk to gather his bag and coat. Watching him, Mr. Chua fretted, desperately pleading with Mrs. Lim. "Madam, please, just one chance. I will apologize to Mr. Tan." No, to Kevin. "I will kneel and apologize. Please." Mrs. Lim looked at him as if he were an insect and said, "You shouldn't be apologizing to me, and I am certainly not the one whose apology you should be seeking." She looked around, her voice clear enough for the entire office to hear. "Who is in charge here? Get the CEO out here." At her words, another ripple went through the employees. The situation was escalating. It was no longer a simple personal dispute, but was threatening to become an issue for the entire company. A staff member hurriedly ran to the CEO's office, and a moment later, a middle-aged man in a suit rushed out with a surprised expression. It was Mr. Ko Wee-seng, the CEO of Nexus Dynamics. Mr. Ko had just received a report that a vehicle from Evergreen Holdings had entered the lobby and was perplexed as there had been no prior visit scheduled. But when he heard about the commotion in Development Team 2's office and rushed over, an unimaginable scene unfolded before him. Mrs. Lim, the advisor to Evergreen Holdings, often referred to as the hidden chairperson of the group, was standing there, and before her, his company's manager was sweating profusely, completely at a loss. "Madam, to what do we owe the pleasure of your visit?" Mr. Ko, though not fully grasping the situation, bowed respectfully. "Mr. Ko, you manage your staff very well, don't you, Mrs.?" Lim's piercing words sent a shiver down Mr. Ko's spine. "What seems to be the matter? Is it standard operating procedure in your company for a manager to slap an employee?" Only then did Mr. Ko look at Mr. Chua's and Kevin Tan's faces and the tense office atmosphere, realizing the gravity of the situation. He felt his head spinning. "Mr. Chua, what have you done?" Mr. Ko roared at Mr. Chua, but Mrs. Lim interrupted him. "Your job right now is not to reprimand him." Mrs. Lim looked directly at Mr. Ko and said, "I have personally witnessed and heard what happened today, so no further explanation is needed. By tomorrow morning, I want a full investigation plan into all inappropriate actions and instances of workplace violence within this company, along with the results of a proper disciplinary committee meeting for Mr. Chua Seng-ki on my desk." That was an order. An order from an absolute authority figure that could not be refused. And Mr. Ko Wee-seng, you will not be free from accountability either. Prepare a separate statement detailing your negligence in supervision and oversight. Mr. Ko's face turned ashen. He repeatedly stammered, "Yes, understood. I will rectify it like a parrot." After saying all she needed to, Mrs. Lim took Kevin's arm, who was still standing there numbly with his things packed. "Let's go." Then she picked up the bento bag that was on the floor with her other hand. Although its warmth had long dissipated, the weight of the care and effort put into it had not diminished even slightly. She exited the office with a dignified and elegant stride, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. As Mrs. Lim and Kevin vanished into the elevator, the heavy silence that had oppressed the office finally broke. Mr. Ko unleashed his fury upon the kneeling Miss Chua, and the employees began to whisper amongst themselves, glancing at each other. That afternoon, Nexus Dynamics was in absolute turmoil. The rumor that Mr. Kevin Tan was the son-in-law of Evergreen Holdings advisor spread like wildfire throughout the company, and Mr. Chua Seng-ki's assault became the epicenter of an uncontrollable storm that began to shake the company to its core. The air inside the car was thick with tension. Mrs. Lim raised the privacy partition between the driver's seat and the back, then stared silently out the window. Kevin beside her glanced nervously at his mother-in-law, fidgeting. Like a sinner, he hung his head low, the sharp crack of the slap and the whispers of the office still echoing in his ears. Despair, shame, and overwhelming apology towards his mother-in-law tangled in his heart, weighing heavily on him. Of all people, he had shown his most pathetic and powerless self to his mother-in-law, who had even gone to the trouble of preparing a bento for him. How much time passed? It was Mrs. Lim who broke the silence. "Since when?" Her voice was calm but imbued with deep sadness. Kevin found it hard to speak. "I asked, since when have such things been happening, Mrs. Lim asked again, and Kevin swallowed hard, answering with difficulty. "About 3 months. 3 months, since shortly after you married Cheryl." Mrs. Lim's voice dropped a notch. Kevin nodded. Mr. Chua's bullying had started in earnest shortly after his marriage. It began with trivial nitpicking, gradually escalating to overt verbal abuse, and eventually culminating in physical violence as witnessed today. Why? What was the reason? I assume your work performance isn't lacking. It was because of the project I was in charge of, Kevin slowly began. He was a key member of a new technology development project that the company was staking its future on. The problem was that Miss Chua, despite being the overall project manager, lacked the actual technical skill and ideas. He would often steal the ideas of Kevin and other team members, repackaging them as his own achievements, and whenever the project hit a snag, he would shift the blame to his subordinates and unleash a torrent of abusive language. In particular, as Kevin's capabilities became more pronounced, Mr. Chua's envy and jealousy intensified. He sought to control and subdue Kevin to mask his own incompetence and assert his authority. Mrs. Lim listened to her son-in-law's story in silence. She knew the inner workings of corporate organizations better than anyone. She could well imagine the ugly process by which an incompetent superior would trample on a capable subordinate. But why? Why didn't you say anything? You should have told Cheryl or even me. That was the part that pained Mrs. Lim the most. Why had he carried all that burden alone? Kevin hesitated for a long time before answering. I'm sorry, but I wanted to handle it myself. His voice trembled slightly. I didn't want people to say that I was coasting at work because of my in-laws' influence. I didn't want to be a shameful husband or a shameful son-in-law to Cheryl or to you, madam. I thought that if I just finished this project, well, everything would be all right. That was Kevin's honest feeling. He knew his wife's family was wealthy, but he never imagined they were connected to Evergreen Holdings, let alone that his mother-in-law was such a formidable figure. He simply wanted to be recognized for his own abilities. He wanted to be a husband Cheryl could be proud of. That's why he had endured it all. His clumsy pride had ironically exacerbated the situation. At Kevin's answer, Mrs. Lim couldn't say anything more. How could she not understand her son-in-law's feelings? But she also needed him to realize how foolish and dangerous such stubborn responsibility and pride could be. Kevin. Mrs. Lim took his hand. His rough, large hand was cold. The fact that you are Cheryl's husband and my son-in-law does not change. Why would that be something to be ashamed of? Family is meant to be the strongest fence, a place where we can lean on each other. It's a place where you should say if you're struggling and shout if you're hurting. Hiding it is a foolish act that creates an invisible wall between you and us. At Mrs. Lim's warm words, Kevin finally broke down and wept once more. He cried quietly, his shoulders shaking like a child's. Mrs. Lim gently patted her son-in-law's back. At that very moment, Cheryl, having returned home, was surprised to see her husband and mother entering together. Unlike usual, Kevin's face was swollen, and her mother's expression was grim. Mom, Kevin, what's going on? Why are you together, and what happened to your face? To her daughter's anxious questions, Mrs. Lim sat on the living room sofa and calmly explained everything that had happened that day. Cheryl, initially furious about the unfair treatment her husband had suffered at work, was aghast when her mother reached the part about slapping Mr. Chua and handing him a business card. You slapped Mr. Chua and gave him a business card. Cheryl knew her mother was not an ordinary person. She had always thought her mother lived comfortably on the inheritance left by her late father and quietly engaged in social activities by running the Evergreen Philanthropic Fund. But the fact that she was an advisor to Evergreen Holdings, the parent company of Nexus Dynamics, was completely new information. Mom, what do you mean advisor to Evergreen Holdings? Your maternal grandfather was very close to Evergreen's founder, and I was deeply involved in the company for a while when I was younger. Now I've stepped back from direct management only, lending my name Mrs. Lim, explained calmly. Cheryl was overwhelmed. Her anger at the terrible ordeal her husband had suffered mingled with the shock of her mother's previously unknown background. Did Kevin know about this? Cheryl asked, looking at Kevin. Kevin shook his head. No, I just found out today too. At his answer, Cheryl felt both relieved and at the same time apologetic towards Kevin. She wondered if her husband might have been misunderstood or felt burdened because of a family background she herself hadn't even known about. And she could now somewhat understand why he had kept such a difficult ordeal to himself. That night, a heavy silence hung between the three of them. Kevin was tormented by guilt, feeling that things had escalated too much because of him. Cheryl's mind was a jumble of apology for not noticing her husband's suffering and confusion about her mother's immense background. Mrs. Lim, while understanding their feelings, had no intention of letting this matter rest. This was not merely a personal vendetta for her son-in-law's humiliation. It was clear evidence that a corner of the company she had dedicated her life to was rotting. The festering wound had to be excised. Otherwise, she knew all too well the poison would spread throughout the entire organization. The next morning, Mrs. Lim rose earlier than usual. She went into her study, picked up the phone, and made a call. The person on the other end was the head of Evergreen Holdings' legal team, which also served as a special audit team, a team she had trusted implicitly for decades. "It's Mrs. Lim. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say and follow my instructions. We're launching a special audit of Nexus Dynamics. Scrutinize everything: accounting, human resources, project management, every single detail. Prioritize the investigation of everything related to Mr. Chua Sang-ki of Development Team 2. And conduct all of this quietly and swiftly in the form of a routine audit from the group headquarters, not under my name." On the other end of the phone, the person did not question a single word, simply replying, "Understood, madam." Mrs. Lim hung up the phone and looked out the window. The dawn light, just beginning to break, illuminated her face. The storm had only just begun. And the eye of that storm was herself. She was prepared to stand at the center of that storm, willing to uproot everything that was ailing her son-in-law and her company. The winds of change sweeping through Nexus Dynamics were faster and more discreet than expected. The morning after Mrs. Lim's visit, employees arrived at work as usual, but the atmosphere in the office had subtly shifted. Everyone whispered about Mr. Kevin Tan, Mr. Chua Sang-ki, and the advisor to Evergreen Holdings, but the protagonists of the incident did not appear at the company. Kevin was on mandatory leave at Mrs. Lim's insistence, and an internal bulletin merely announced that Mr. Chua had been placed on indefinite administrative leave due to personal reasons. Employees instinctively knew that Ms. Chua's administrative leave was essentially a prelude to dismissal. It was a natural consequence, they thought, for having provoked the son-in-law of the revered Evergreen Holdings advisor. However, they had entirely missed the true essence of the situation. The sword Mrs. Lim intended to wield was not aimed solely at Mr. Chua as an individual. That morning, unfamiliar men in dark suits descended upon Nexus Dynamics. They introduced themselves as members of the Evergreen Holdings headquarters audit team. Mr. Ko, remembering Mrs. Lim's warning, greeted them with a pale face. The audit team presented the official pretext of a routine subsidiary management review, but their movements were far too sharp and organized for a regular audit. The team demanded all server access logs, accounting ledgers, corporate credit card usage statements, and all project-related documents from the past few years. Like hunters who had already singled out their prey, they wasted no time delving into the company's most sensitive information. The first target of the audit's blade was naturally Development Team 2. In particular, the progress reports and performance evaluations of all projects Mr. Chua had overseen, as well as team members' HR evaluation records, became subjects of intense scrutiny. The audit team members began interviewing Development Team 2 employees individually and separately. At first, the employees were terrified and kept silent. They feared Mr. Chua's retaliation and did not want to stir up trouble unnecessarily. But the audit team's questions were very persistent and specific. Has Mr. Chua Sang-ki ever presented team members' ideas as his own? Did he fairly distribute project bonuses? Or were there instances of him funneling them to specific individuals or personally diverting some of the funds? If you have experienced verbal abuse or personal insults, please provide specific times and situations. An audit team member told a timid young employee, "We are not here to hold you accountable. Rather, we are here to rectify the system to ensure that diligent employees like you do not suffer unfair treatment. Your testimonies will be kept strictly confidential, and if we fail to correct what is wrong now, the same problems will continue to repeat. The choice is yours." Those words gradually swayed the tightly shut hearts of the employees. The grievances and frustrations that had been suppressed under Mr. Chua's shadow began to spill out one by one. Once one person bravely opened up, others, as if waiting for a signal, began to recount the unfair situations they had endured. Someone spoke of how Mr. Chua had reported a proposal they had worked on all night under his own name the next morning. Another exposed how Miss Chua's cronies, who had contributed almost nothing to projects, had received unfairly high performance bonuses. And finally, a flood of testimonies poured out about Mr. Chua's constant verbal abuse, personal insults, and even minor physical contact, which had been rumored for so long. While not as severe as the slap Kevin had received, it was said that acts like lightly hitting someone's head with a file or roughly shoving their shoulder were commonplace. All those testimonies were recorded and documented. Meanwhile, the audit team analyzing the financial records discovered another suspicious trail. Mr. Chua's corporate credit card usage showed an unusually high amount spent at specific entertainment establishments and golf courses. Checking the dates most coincided with the purchase of important project equipment or software. The audit team immediately secured a list of these suppliers and began to trace their business registration information and their relationship with Mr. Chua. The puzzle pieces were falling into place one by one. Ms. Chua had colluded with specific suppliers to falsify documents, making it appear as if items were purchased at higher prices than their actual cost, and then received a portion of the difference as kickbacks. That money flowed directly into his entertainment and hospitality expenses. He had enriched himself with company funds, and any problems arising from this process were blamed on his team members' incompetence, suppressed with violence. Mr. Chua Sang Ki's personal corruption was snowballing. But that wasn't all Mrs. Lim wanted. She was looking at a bigger picture. She knew from experience that for a person like Mr. Chua to operate with impunity for so long, there must have been a larger power protecting or condoning him. The audit team's blade was slowly closing in on CEO Mr. Ko. Mr. Ko was on tenterhooks. He tried to somehow defuse the audit, even privately suggesting meals or drinks to the audit team leader. But the leader mechanically refused, stating, "We cannot have private meetings with external parties during the audit period." He tried to mobilize all his connections within Evergreen Holdings headquarters to find out the background of this audit, but everyone simply replied that it was a direct instruction from the highest levels of the group, and they knew nothing more. Plagued by anxiety, Mr. Ko began to secretly shred documents in his office late at night. These were his own dirty secrets he hadn't managed to dispose of before the audit team arrived. He too had been siphoning off company funds in ways similar to Mr. Chua. In fact, Mr. Chua was merely his subordinate. Mr. Ko had been creating slush funds on a much larger scale and through more intricate methods. A portion of that money had flowed as bribes to several executives at Evergreen Holdings headquarters. That was why he had been able to maintain his position as CEO of Nexus Dynamics and have his corruption overlooked. But he had no idea that the highest authority who had ordered this audit was Mrs. Lim herself. He firmly believed that the headquarters executives he had bribed would protect him. His foolish belief was shattered in a few days. News came that the audit team had begun tracing his personal accounts and the accounts of people close to him. This would be impossible without a court warrant. It was a signal that this was no longer a mere internal audit, but a serious matter that could escalate into a criminal investigation. Mr. Ko was terrified. In desperation, clutching at straws, he tried to contact Mrs. Lim directly. He made several requests for a meeting through her personal assistant, but the only response was a cold refusal. She has no available appointments. The time for men who danced on the edge of a knife was coming to an end. The edifice of corruption they had built had begun to crumble, helplessly struck by a tiny stone. A single bento box lovingly prepared by a mother-in-law for her son-in-law. They were in their final throes, unaware that the ground beneath them was giving way. Mrs. Lim received daily reports from the audit team in her study. Her expression remained unchanged, but her eyes shone with an increasingly cold intensity. Like a surgeon excising a rotten part, she calmly and precisely directed the next steps. It was time to bring down the final curtain on this sordid play. Kevin's forced leave at home was like living hell. His body was at rest, but his mind was on tenterhooks. He couldn't concentrate on anything, whether it was watching TV or reading a book. When he closed his eyes, the humiliating moments he had endured in the office, the contemptuous glances of his colleagues and his mother-in-law's seemingly disappointed face came to mind, making it hard to breathe. He thought he had ruined everything. His clumsy pride had angered his mother-in-law and turned the entire company upside down. He had no idea how he could face his colleagues if he returned to work. Some would pity him, while others would surely point fingers, calling him the one who caused trouble for the company by relying on powerful connections. Either way, it was unbearable for him. Cheryl, watching her husband, was also uneasy. She wanted to comfort him, but didn't know what to say. "It's okay" would sound hollow, and "Mum will take care of everything" might only wound his pride further. She could only silently stay by his side, cooking his favorite dishes and gently patting his back. An awkward silence hung between the couple. The casual jokes and daily chatter they used to share had disappeared. This incident had created a subtle but definite crack in their relationship. Kevin felt utterly diminished every time he looked at his wife's face, and Cheryl was burdened by constantly trying to gauge her husband's mood. After several days, Kevin decided he could no longer remain so helpless. He resolved that he had to confront the situation directly. He wanted to return to the company, see for himself what was happening, and explain his position to his colleagues. Perhaps he would even have to apologize. He told his wife he was going to the company for a short while. Cheryl looked worried but could not sway her husband's firm resolve. When he finally returned, the company, though outwardly calm, was filled with a palpable tension. As he entered the office, all eyes turned to him. An awkward silence ensued. A few colleagues approached him and cautiously asked how he was. "Mr. Tan, are you all right? You've been through a lot, haven't you?" We knew Mr. Chua would get what he deserved. Their words were a mix of sympathy and comfort. But Kevin felt a subtle distance in their gazes. It was as if he was no longer a colleague they could comfortably joke with, but a special person they couldn't treat lightly. Then his closest colleague, Mr. Lee, who had always been friendly with Kevin, approached him and led him to a meeting room, saying, "Let's talk for a bit." Once the meeting room door closed, Mr. Lee looked around and lowered his voice. "Kevin, are you okay? The atmosphere in the company is crazy right now. I heard that the audit team from HQ came. It's not just an audit. It's like a special investigation by the Commercial Affairs Department. Development Team 2 and even the Finance and Procurement teams are all being turned upside down. People are being called in for interviews every day, and the atmosphere is really tense." Mr. Lee sighed and continued. "Everyone was shocked when they heard that your mother-in-law is the advisor to Evergreen Holdings. Honestly, it's a bit scary. That's why everyone is just watching, not knowing how to talk to you." Kevin smiled bitterly. It was the reaction he had expected. "But Kevin, there's something I really need to tell you." Mr. Lee hesitated for a moment, then, as if making up his mind, began to speak. "Do you know the real reason why Mr. Chua was so much harsher on you? Wasn't it because of the project to steal my ideas and monopolize the credit? That's also true, but it's not the whole story." According to Mr. Lee, Mr. Chua had started actively tormenting Kevin shortly after Kevin married Cheryl. At first, everyone thought it was just envy of the capable Kevin. But one day, Mr. Lee accidentally overheard Mr. Chua talking with another department manager over drinks. Mr. Chua, tipsy, had said that Kevin Tan, he's lucky. He snatched the woman Mr. Kowi Sang's son had his eye on. The CEO is furious, so I'm doing him a favor by taking care of this guy. If I crush him like this, he'll get tired and drop out on his own. Kevin felt as if he had been punched in the head when he heard those words. Mr. Ko's son had his eye on Cheryl. I couldn't believe my ears either. I found out that Mr. Ko's son had approached Cheryl a few times before you two got married. Of course, Cheryl rejected him every time. But Mr. Ko seemed determined to connect his family with Evergreen Holdings somehow. He might not have known your mother-in-law was such a powerful figure, but he was certainly ambitious, just knowing she was the head of a scholarship foundation. So when some guy came along and snatched her away, how could you not times, be an eyesore to him? All the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Behind Mr. Chua's abnormal obsession and violence lay Mr. Ko's ugly ambition and directives. He wasn't just being tormented by an incompetent superior's jealousy. A larger, uglier conspiracy was at play. Kevin felt chills run down his spine. He realized how naive and foolish he had been. He had believed that if he just persevered on his own, everything would be resolved, but his opponents had been intent on destroying him from the very beginning. Kevin's face was grim as he left the meeting room. Any feelings of apology or shame towards his colleagues had vanished, replaced by a cold fury that filled his heart. He decided he would no longer run or hide from this fight. This was no longer just a matter of personal pride. It was a battle for his and his wife's honor and against corrupt power. He returned to his desk and turned on his computer. He began to gather all the reports and emails he had written under Mr. Chua's direction over the past few months, as well as evidence of unjust work directives. These were all the materials he had passively kept until now, fearing retaliation and holding on to a vague hope that it would all end someday. Inside, there was clear evidence that Mr. Chua had inflated project costs or directed work to specific contractors. These were crucial pieces of evidence that could expose the ugly truth hidden behind the facades of Mr. Ko and Mr. Chua. Kevin was no longer a victim. He was now a warrior determined to lead the fight to protect himself and uphold justice. His eyes shone with a resolve and strength incomparable to before. Kevin stayed late at the office organizing the data. His hands moved tirelessly across the keyboard. Fragments of memory and digital records were assembling into a massive picture. It was becoming clear how Mr. Chua and Mr. Ko had been corrupting the company and how deep and widespread their network of corruption was. He didn't just collect evidence. He meticulously organized and analyzed what each piece of data meant and what legal responsibilities could be assigned. As someone intimately familiar with the technical aspects of the projects, he could precisely pinpoint the flaws in inflated budgets or unnecessary equipment purchase records. These were deadly pieces of evidence that only an insider could know difficult, even for an external audit team to discover. Having finished all the organizing, Kevin did not hesitate to call his mother-in-law Mrs. Lim. "Madam, it's Kevin. I have something to tell you." His voice, instead of its previous helplessness and guilt, was filled with calm and resolute determination. Mrs. Lim immediately sensed the change in her son-in-law. "Yes, what is it? I have gathered some documents. Evidence of Mr. Chua Seng Ki's and Mr. Kowi Seng's corruption. I believe it will be helpful to the audit team." Mrs. Lim was silent for a moment. Then she chuckled softly. "Just as I thought. I chose well." "Understood. Hand over those documents to the person I send tomorrow morning. And you stay with Cheryl and don't get involved any further. I'll take care of the rest." The next morning, Kevin was a little surprised to see the person waiting for him at the designated meeting place. The person who stepped out of the car with Evergreen Holdings' logo was a middle-aged woman whose eyes and demeanor exuded an aura of someone extraordinary. She introduced herself as Mrs. Lim's chief of staff and respectfully received the USB drive Kevin handed her. "Madam sends her regards. She says you've done an excellent job. Now you should rest easy and focus solely on protecting your wife as a family man. She will handle the rest." With those words, the chief of staff bowed deeply to Kevin and drove away. Kevin stood there, finally feeling a heavy weight lift from his heart as he exhaled deeply. The die was cast. The data Kevin provided gave wings to the Evergreen Holdings audit team. With concrete evidence of internal corruption that had been difficult for them to verify externally, the audit gained significant momentum. In particular, crucial evidence was uncovered showing that CEO Mr. Ko had created slush funds through specific shell companies and funneled a portion of that money to certain executives at headquarters. Mrs. Lim, after receiving all reports, immediately contacted the chairman of Evergreen Holdings directly. The chairman of Evergreen Holdings was her cousin brother, whom she affectionately called Ah Boy. "It's me, Mr. Tan. HTTPS www.google.com/earlsa égale q égale https://3 ampere%2 farad%2 vertex Cesark cloud Google. Som procentva f grounding API redirect. Procentva FAUZYQFBJKJ zgoływuc P1 Stymkws 67 sewew 0Y5 QLADS R80 8 PPGDQ 4 MKS devwaj 4 Yizi ECCF PZ5 DR 6 DH 1 LNIL NCO Keek Wars 8 Miser Ms YEJJW2AXM Hive TJQIFX 67 GMEAJ NA %3D. Sister, what a surprise. I hope everything is all right. You've received the report on Nexus Dynamics, haven't you? Yes, I received an interim report from the audit team. I apologize for the mismanagement of the subsidiary. I will immediately dismiss all involved parties and take legal action. Mrs. Lim replied coldly to the chairman's words. Dismissal alone won't suffice. This is a fundamental issue for our entire Evergreen Holdings. It seems there are individuals within your network who have been accepting money from Mr. Ko. We must root out everything down to the very core this time. If left unchecked, it will become a cancer that will eventually bring down the entire group. At Mrs. Lim's resolute words, the chairman swallowed hard. He knew better than anyone how formidable Mrs. Lim could be once she made up her mind. What should we do, sister? I will follow your lead. Convene an emergency board meeting. I will personally attend and expose everything. And officially request a police investigation. Don't even think about quietly burying this internally. We must publicly disclose everything and show that we are excising our own festering wounds. Only then can we avoid losing market trust. It was a highly risky and bold decision that could shake Evergreen Holdings to its foundation. But Mrs. Lim did not hesitate. She had seen countless times how a small wound, if hidden, could lead to the entire body rotting. A few days later, an emergency board meeting of Evergreen Holdings was convened. As Mrs. Lim, who had long refrained from appearing at official events, entered the tense boardroom where all key executives of the group were gathered, everyone grew nervous. Mrs. Lim took the chairperson's seat and had the audit team leader calmly present the findings of the Nexus Dynamics corruption. From the personal corruption of CEO, Mr. Ko and Ms. Chua Sung-ki to the colluding suppliers and even the names of headquarters, executives who had received bribes, each was named. The faces of the implicated executives turned ashen. When the presentation concluded, Mrs. Lim rose from her seat and looked around at the directors. Some of you here may not be unrelated to this matter. However, I have no intention of offering them a merciful exit. Evergreen Holdings is a company my father and his comrades built with blood and sweat. I will no longer condone a few rotten parasites gnawing away at the company's foundations. Her voice was chilling enough to freeze the entire boardroom. Effective today, Mr. Ko Wee-seng, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, Mr. Chua Seng, Key of Development Team 2, and all other implicated parties will be dismissed and reported to the police on charges of embezzlement and breach of trust. Furthermore, headquarters executives who accepted bribes from them will also be suspended from their positions and actively cooperate with the police investigation. Does anyone here object to this decision? No one dared to open their mouths. Everyone knew that no excuses or resistance would work in the face of Mrs. Lim's wrath. The board's decision was immediately put into action. That afternoon, police investigators raided Nexus Dynamics, conducting searches, and Mr. Ko and Mr. Chua were led away in handcuffs from their offices. The news spread rapidly through the media. Evergreen Holdings subsidiary corruption scandal exposed executives arrested. Evergreen Holdings vows to eradicate corruption through internal audit, signifying major reform. Kevin and Cheryl, seeing Mr. Ko being escorted away on the news, were filled with mixed emotions. Bitterness outweighed gratification. They were witnessing the bleak reality of how one person's misguided ambition could destroy so much. Kevin quietly took his wife's hand. It seems it's all over now. Cheryl squeezed her husband's hand in return and nodded. You've been through a lot, my dear. A faint smile finally appeared on both their faces. It felt as if they had just emerged from a long, dark tunnel, but they did not yet know that this counterattack was merely the prelude, and what direction the aftermath of this incident would steer their lives. The stone Mrs. Lim had cast was creating far greater ripples than they had imagined. With the arrest of Mr. Ko Wee-seng and Mr. Chua Seng-ki, the Nexus Dynamics situation seemed to be contained for the moment. The media praised Evergreen Holdings' self-correcting ability, and the stock market, after a brief tremor, stabilized. A new CEO was appointed to Nexus Dynamics, replacing the corrupt management, and a major organizational restructuring was announced to revitalize the company's atmosphere. Kevin returned to the company after his long leave. His colleagues welcomed him with much more warmth than before. It had become known that he was not just someone with good connections, but a courageous whistleblower who played a crucial role in exposing a massive internal corruption within the company. As rumors spread that the evidence Kevin had secretly collected while resisting Mr. Chua's unfair directives was central to resolving the situation, the perception of him shifted to one of respect and gratitude. The newly appointed CEO separately called Kevin, commended his contributions, and offered him the position of head of the new technology development project. It was an unprecedented promotion, something unimaginable before. Kevin hesitated for a moment, but then accepted the offer. Instead of running or turning a blind eye, he wanted to rebuild the shattered project with his own hands. He believed it was the way to repay his colleagues' trust and restore his own honor. Everything seemed to be falling back into place. Kevin and Cheryl's relationship regained its former warmth, and Mrs. Lim returned to her quiet routine, spending her time tending to her garden and reading as if nothing had happened. But in the shadows, another conspiracy was quietly brewing. The biggest blow from this incident wasn't just to Mr. Ko as an individual. There were Evergreen Holdings headquarters executives who had regularly received bribes from him, and numerous partner companies that had colluded with him to secure illicit gains. They learned that the trigger for this entire situation was Mrs. Lim's son-in-law, Kevin Tan. In their eyes, Kevin was no less than an enemy who had killed their goose that laid golden eggs. In particular, Mr. Tae Kien-sung, one of the headquarters executives who had been suspended due to the incident, trembled with fury and humiliation. He was a man who had spent decades at Evergreen Holdings handling all sorts of dirty work to reach his current position. He had amassed vast wealth through bribes received from Mr. Ko and had formed a powerful cartel within the group, wielding immense influence. But because of one young man who suddenly appeared, he had lost everything in an instant. Mr. Tae had no intention of retreating. He began secretly contacting other executives in a similar predicament. We can't just take this lying down, can we? Just because Advisor Lim is behind him, do we have to cower in fear forever? Have you done a background check on that Kevin Tan? There's no one in this world without a single flaw, is there? Mrs. Lim is just a human too. Why wouldn't she have weaknesses? They say her husband died early and she raised only one daughter. If something were to happen to her daughter or son-in-law, would she really remain as composed as she is now? Their conversation drifted towards increasingly dangerous and malicious schemes. Instead of getting their hands dirty directly, they hired people with money to tail Kevin Tan. They kept him under constant surveillance, desperate to find even the smallest fault. At first, Kevin didn't notice anything. He focused solely on his work day and night as the new project head. But after a few days, he began to feel something was amiss. He felt as though the same car was following him on his way home, and he saw unfamiliar men loitering near his apartment building a few times. His wife Cheryl also expressed her anxiety. She heard someone fiddling with their front door lock when she was home alone, or received strange calls from blocked numbers. At first, he tried to dismiss it, thinking she was just being overly sensitive. But the unsettling signs became increasingly obvious. One morning, Kevin discovered that all 4 tires of his car had been punctured by a sharp object. It was no accident. It was clearly a deliberate act by someone. That night, Kevin couldn't sleep. This wasn't just a threat. It was a clear attack that endangered his and his wife's safety. He wondered if he should inform his mother-in-law. It wounded his pride to rely on his mother-in-law's influence again, but this was no longer a problem he could handle alone. His wife's safety was at stake. Finally, the next morning, he went to Mrs. Lim. As he recounted everything that had happened, Mrs. Lim's face hardened with anger. Foolish people. They lack the courage to confront me directly, so they resort to the most cowardly and despicable methods to provoke me. Her eyes gleamed coldly. She had not believed that everything was over after the initial incident. She knew that though the rotten roots had been cut, the deep soil where they had spread had not been fully cleansed. And now the pests in that soil were starting to show themselves. Don't worry, I will take care of everything. From today, I will assign people to watch over you and Cheryl. Never go out alone and be wary of strangers. Mrs. Lim immediately instructed her chief of staff. The most elite agents from Evergreen Holdings security teams, skilled and discreet, began to shadow Kevin and Cheryl, providing 24-hour protection. At the same time, Mrs. Lim ordered background checks on Mr. Tae and the other dismissed executives. She began to unearth all their weaknesses that could lead to social ruin, from how they acquired their wealth, to their children's admissions, scandals, and even hidden mistresses. This was no longer an internal corporate power struggle. This was Mrs. Lim's ruthless retribution against those who dared to threaten her family. Mr. Tae and his associates were completely unaware that their tailing had been discovered, and that they themselves were now under surveillance. Failing to find any significant flaws in Kevin, they began to devise an even bolder and more dangerous plan. Dealing with Kevin Tan directly is too risky. What if we target his wife, Mrs. Lim's daughter, a horrifying suggestion from one of them, was met with silent agreement from the others. They had already lost their reason. Blinded by revenge, they were about to cross a line they shouldn't have. The unseen enemy's blades were now aimed not at Kevin, but at the person most precious to him, Cheryl. Beneath the city's dazzling lights, another silent war was beginning, where the boundaries between good and evil blurred. Their lives appeared peaceful, but beneath the surface, a tense atmosphere simmered. Kevin and Cheryl lived cautiously protected by discreet security. At first, they felt uncomfortable, as if every move was being watched, but they gradually grew accustomed to it, realizing it was their only safeguard against the invisible threat. Kevin delved deeper into his work. He believed that successfully completing the project was the surest way to repay those who trusted him and to prove himself to those who threatened him. Under his leadership, the new technology development project progressed smoothly. Team members united, working day and night on research. Cheryl decided to take a temporary leave from the gallery where she worked. She judged it wiser to reduce her time alone and wait for her husband at home where it was safer. However, her anxiety did not easily subside. Sometimes, when she looked out the window, she thought a strange car was parked for a long time in the alley near her house, and at night, even the slightest sound would make her jump. Mrs. Lim outwardly behaved as usual, but beneath the surface, she was constantly in motion. Her intelligence team was digging into every aspect of Mr. Tay and his gang. They were receiving real-time reports on whom they met, what they discussed, and even large sums of money being withdrawn from their accounts and where it was flowing. Mr. Tay and his associates, completely unaware that they were playing right into Mrs. Lim's hands, were increasingly concretizing their dangerous plan. They paid a large sum of money to illegal private investigators and ex-convicts. Their objective was clear: to kidnap Kevin Tan's wife Cheryl and blackmail Mrs. Lim. They waited for a time when Cheryl would be alone. They planned to execute the crime during a very brief window when Kevin would be working late and the security personnel would be changing shifts. The date was set for a rainy night a few days later. They believed the dismal weather would help distract people and erase traces of their crime. D-Day was approaching. Mrs. Lim's intelligence team detected a large sum withdrawn from Mr. K's associates' accounts flowing into shell accounts, and they even discovered that this money went to an illegal private investigation agency connected to a criminal organization. All signs pointed to the worst-case scenario. Mrs. Lim's chief of staff urgently reported, "Madam, it seems they are about to make their move. Based on the money flow and call records, tonight is the most likely. The target is probably Madam Cheryl." Mrs. Lim's face hardened like ice as she heard the report. "Have you called the police?" "Not yet. Rushing to report might make them change their plans or scatter, which could be even more dangerous. The evidence is also still insufficient." "Good." Mrs. Lim closed her eyes for a moment, deep in thought. It would be easy to stop them by calling the police. But she felt that wasn't enough. Rats would just scurry back into their holes. They would bide their time and threaten her family again someday. This time, she had to cut them off at the root completely. To do so, she had to make them walk into the trap they themselves had set. She opened her eyes and with a determined look said, "Let's set a trap." That night, as predicted, heavy rain began to fall. Kevin was scheduled to return home late from work due to an important simulation task. Cheryl was alone at home waiting for her husband. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as Mr. Tay and his associates had planned. Around 10 p.m., the security personnel stationed around Cheryl's apartment temporarily vacated their posts according to a prearranged signal. Confirming their disappearance, a black van quietly slid into the apartment's underground parking lot. Two burly men, their faces covered by hats and masks, stepped out of the car and expertly ascended to Cheryl's floor via the emergency stairwell. They easily bypassed the front door's digital lock with a tool they had prepared and infiltrated the apartment. Cheryl, who was sitting on the living room sofa reading a book, had no time to scream as the intruders suddenly burst in and covered her mouth. The men roughly subdued her and tried to drag her out in a sack they had brought. It was at that very moment. "That's far enough." A low yet powerful voice echoed from the darkness. The intruders, startled, turned to see Mrs. Lim standing at the entrance of the master bedroom, which connected to the living room. Beside her stood several sturdy bodyguards armed. They were the security personnel who had been hidden throughout the house. The intruders were flustered. They realized it was a trap, but it was too late. As they tried to resist, the bodyguards moved without hesitation. With a few dull thuds, the intruders were swiftly overpowered and fell to the floor. Mrs. Lim approached the trembling Cheryl and embraced her. "It's all right, my dear. It's all over now." "Mum, I was so scared." Cheryl, held in her mother's arms, finally burst into tears. At the same time, at a secluded hotel bar on the outskirts, Mr. Tay and his associates were toasting, awaiting news of their success. They firmly believed their plan had perfectly succeeded. They expected to receive a call soon announcing Cheryl's kidnapping, and then they would contact Mrs. Lim, enjoying her downfall as they demanded a huge ransom. Their cell phone rang. The caller was the head of the private investigation agency they had hired. Mr. Tay answered with a triumphant smile. How did it go? Was it handled cleanly? But the voice on the other end was not the PI agency head's, Mr. Tay, Kian sang. Mr. Tay felt a sudden chill run down his spine. "Who is this?" "It's me, Mrs. Lim." The moment Mrs. Lim's voice was heard, Mr. Tay felt his heart stop. The faces of his colleagues who were with him also turned ashen. "How does it feel to fall into the trap you yourselves set? My people are on their way to the hotel where you are now. The police are with them. You have crossed a line that no human being should cross. Now it's time to pay the price." The call ended, and a moment later, the hotel bar doors burst open, and police officers along with Mrs. Lim's people stormed in. Mr. Tay and his associates were trapped like rats. They were handcuffed without any resistance. Their faces showed not only defeat, but also the terror of late realization of how formidable an opponent they had provoked. After everything was settled, Mrs. Lim looked around the ransacked living room. Her face showed relief, but also the lingering remnants of intense fury. She was willing to become a devil to protect her family. And tonight, she had only revealed a small part of that devil. This incident was not over yet. She firmly resolved to uncover the roots of this crime and everything behind it to ensure such a thing would never happen again. With the on-site arrest of Mr. Tay and his associates, the incident took a new turn. A simple corporate corruption case had now escalated into a heinous crime of attempted kidnapping. The media covered the story extensively every day, and Evergreen Holdings' name once again became the talk of the town. This time, however, public sympathy was on their side. As it became known that disgruntled former executives dismissed due to corruption had committed a vile act of revenge, public attention and sympathy poured out to Mrs. Lim's family as the victims. When the police investigation began, Mr. Tay and his associates initially vehemently denied the charges. They claimed they had only lent money and knew nothing about the kidnapping plan. However, their lies did not last long in the face of the evidence Mrs. Lim had already secured. Their call recordings, bank transfer records, and the confessions of the culprits arrested at the scene became crucial evidence. Cornered Mr. Tay eventually confessed everything. But as if unable to go down alone, he began to drag others down with him. He submitted a letter sent by former CEO Mr. Ko from prison as evidence revealing that the entire criminal plan had actually originated from Mr. Ko's instructions. Mr. Ko, seeking revenge on Mrs. Lim and Kevin Tan for taking everything from him, had instigated Mr. Tay, who was outside, to hire people to torment them. As the masterminds behind the incident were progressively revealed, all those involved faced the full force of the law. Mr. Ko received a much heavier sentence, with additional charges of criminal instigation on top of embezzlement and breach of trust, and Mr. Tay's group also could not escape severe penalties. Everything seemed to be resolved justly. But Mrs. Lim couldn't shake a lingering unease in her heart. As she delved into this incident, she instinctively felt that within the colossal organization of Evergreen Holdings, there existed deeper and darker cracks than she had imagined. She suspected that Mr. Tay and Mr. Ko were merely the tail, and the real body might be hidden elsewhere. She felt that the time had come for her to step forward personally. For decades, she had remained in the shadows, withdrawn from active management, but now she had to take center stage to set the company right. She could no longer bear to see her father's legacy, which she had dedicated her life to preserving, continue to rot. Mrs. Lim summoned her cousin brother, the chairman of Evergreen Holdings, to her home. "Mr. Tan, it seems I must return to the company now." Her bombshell announcement startled the chairman. "Sister, what do you mean? You already wield significant influence over the group. I realized through this incident that simply advising and overseeing from behind is not enough. Pruning a few rotten branches won't do. It's time to completely overturn the soil and replant the entire tree. I will take on the role of chairman myself. Mrs. Lim's words were not merely a suggestion. They were an announcement. She was a co-founder of Evergreen Holdings and still held a substantial stake. The chairman knew well that she could take over management at any time if she wished. If that is your wish, sister, then of course I will follow. However, the opposition from the board and shareholders will not be insignificant. You have been out of active management for too long in your age. Don't worry about that. I will handle everything. You just prepare for an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders. Mrs. Lim's resolve was firm. A few days later, when the convocation of an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders to approve the change of chairman at Evergreen Holdings was announced, the business world was turned upside down. The news that Mrs. Lim, the hidden powerhouse of Evergreen Holdings, who had remained shrouded in mystery, would return to active management after decades caused a massive stir. Naturally, there was strong internal opposition. In particular, the entrenched powers aligned with Ms. Tay, realizing their positions were in jeopardy, desperately moved to block Mrs. Lim's return. They exploited her advanced age and conservative views on female executives to create negative public opinion. What could an old woman who spent her life at home know? Does she think the company is a community center for seniors? But their resistance was powerless against Mrs. Lim's meticulous planning. On the day of the shareholders' meeting, Mrs. Lim revealed a card no one had anticipated. She took to the stage and presented her vision for the future of Evergreen Holdings. What she proposed was not merely strengthening existing businesses. It was a revolutionary blueprint, detailing aggressive investment plans in future industries, such as AI, biotechnology, and eco-friendly energy, and a complete overhaul of the outdated organizational culture. Her presentation was incredibly detailed, logical, and overwhelming. It was the culmination of decades of intense study and preparation, showing how she had never lost touch with the world's trends. And then she unveiled her final trump card. And now I would like to introduce the new blood who will lead this great challenge. Mrs. Lim gestured, and the meeting room doors opened and a young man walked in. It was her son-in-law, Kevin Tan. Everyone was aghast. The hall stirred with murmurs, wondering if she intended to name her son-in-law a mere associate in a subsidiary, with no management training, as her successor. Mrs. Lim quelled the commotion with a wave of her hand and continued, I am not making Mr. Kevin Tan my successor. He will take on the crucial role of the inaugural head of the Future Strategy Business Division, leading Evergreen Holdings' path forward in new technologies. His capabilities have already been proven by successfully leading Nexus Dynamics' new technology project. Evergreen Holdings will now evaluate and promote talent based solely on skill and vision, not seniority, academic background, or connections. Mr. Kevin Tan will be the first symbol of this. It was a groundbreaking yet undeniably persuasive proposal. Mrs. Lim had made it clear that she was not simply parachuting her son-in-law into a position, but recognizing and appointing him as an expert in the field where he could excel the most. Ultimately, the shareholders' meeting ended in Mrs. Lim's overwhelming victory. She was officially appointed the new chairman of Evergreen Holdings, and the business community began to take notice of the moves of this charismatic female titan appearing after decades. Kevin accepted his new role in a daze. While surprised that he was included in his mother-in-law's grand plan, he also felt his heart swell with excitement. Now, he was no longer merely someone's son-in-law, but a key talent responsible for the future of a massive conglomerate needing to prove his capabilities. Mrs. Lim and Kevin, the two of them, were now comrades on the same journey. A challenging voyage awaited them, reforming the giant ship that was Evergreen Holdings and driving out all hidden enemies. Hadn't it been said that if you stare into the abyss for too long, the abyss stares back at you? They were now willingly stepping into that deep, dark abyss. As Mrs. Lim took office as the chairman of Evergreen Holdings, a massive tectonic shift occurred throughout the group. Her first action was to drive out the ghosts, the entrenched old guard executives who had parasitized the group for decades, hindering change and innovation. Individuals like Mr. Tay. She was not swayed by past connections or sentiment. She made personnel decisions based solely on competence, integrity, and a vision for the future. Overnight, numerous executives were dismissed, and their vacant positions were filled by young, capable talents appointed regardless of age or rank. The organization was unsettled, but at the same time, a healthy tension and vitality began to circulate. Kevin, entrusted with the crucial role of head of the Future Strategy Business Division, stood at the center of this change. He was given the full backing of the group, along with immense authority. However, he also had to endure an equal measure of envy and jealousy. The label of chairman's son-in-law was not easily shed, no matter how outstanding his performance. In particular, the resistance from veteran executives leading existing core business units was beyond imagination. They dismissed Kevin's new initiatives as unfounded pipe dreams, constantly criticizing them and adopting an uncooperative stance. Subtle obstructions continued, such as openly ignoring Kevin during meetings or denying his department the necessary budget and personnel. Mr. Tan, I know you're an IT expert, but this is a manufacturing site where tens of thousands of livelihoods are at stake. Do you think the world operates according to plans drawn up at a desk? The CEO of a traditional, heavy industry subsidiary rebuked Kevin at every meeting. He was an elder statesman who had served the company since Evergreen Holdings' founding, wielding immense influence within the group. He was the most powerful ghost of the old kingdom, whom even Mrs. Lim couldn't easily discard. Kevin did not confront them directly. Instead, he decided to prove himself through results. Working tirelessly with his team, he developed an innovative process improvement plan that integrated cutting-edge AI and automation technologies into the outdated production lines. Implementing this plan would dramatically boost productivity, significantly reduce defects, and even mitigate safety risks. But the heavy industry CEO scoffed. Pipe dreams? How can we change methods we've used for decades overnight? What does a young man with no field experience know? He dismissed Kevin's proposal and strongly opposed it at the board meeting. Other executives wary of him seemed to concur. Kevin's first attempt at reform seemed to hit a wall. That evening, Kevin returned home physically and mentally exhausted. His shoulders were heavily slumped. Cheryl, seeing her husband's weary state compassionately, offered him a warm cup of tea. It's tough, isn't it? Nothing is easy at first. Don't be too impatient. Her wife's comfort momentarily eased Kevin's mind, but a suffocating feeling as if facing an insurmountable wall still lingered in his heart. Just then, a call came from Mrs. Lim. I heard about what happened at the board meeting today. You must be upset, no, madam. It's just my shortcomings. No, you are not lacking. It's just that they are too outdated. To catch ghosts, you must show them what they fear most. The next day, Mrs. Lim unexpectedly visited the heavy industry subsidiary's production plant herself. Wearing a hard hat and work overalls, she meticulously toured every corner of the noisy factory. It was a place she had frequented daily with her father when she was young decades ago. She shook hands with the factory workers one by one, listening to their grievances. She saw with her own eyes how many accidents they were exposed to due to outdated equipment, and how much unnecessary sweat they shed due to inefficient work methods. After her factory inspection, Mrs. Lim urgently convened all executives. She then looked coldly at the heavy industry CEO and said, "Mr. Ong, when was the last time you personally toured this factory?" Mr. Ong stammered, flustered. I receive daily reports. Is looking at numerical reports from your desk the same as knowing the reality on the ground? Do these sweating employees appear to you merely as numbers? They are Evergreen Holdings' most valuable assets, yet you are so preoccupied with protecting your outdated experience and authority, with no regard for their safety or future. Mrs. Lim's voice was quiet, but it contained icy fury. Implement the process improvement plan proposed by Mr. Kevin Tan yesterday immediately. I will personally ensure the necessary budget and personnel are provided. If you cannot comply with this decision, you will have to step down from your position first. Evergreen Holdings no longer has time to be held back by the ghosts of the past. Her declaration silenced the meeting room as if cold water had been thrown on it. No one dared to challenge Mrs. Lim's resolve. Mr. Ong, the most powerful ghost of the Old Kingdom, had no choice but to bow his head before Mrs. Lim's overwhelming charisma and sharp insight that cut through to the heart of the matter. Following that incident, Kevin's position changed dramatically. It began to be understood that his proposals were no longer pipe dreams but realistic alternatives for the group's future. Other subsidiaries eagerly sought his collaboration. Kevin gained confidence. He realized that his mother-in-law and chairman Mrs. Lim had not just given him an opportunity, but had created a playing field where he could excel, providing strong support from behind. He was no longer alone, but they could not yet rest easy. The banished ghosts did not disappear so easily. They gathered in the dark, hidden corners, plotting another scheme to bring down the new kingdom. Their desire for revenge was now a much deeper and darker blade aimed at the weakest link in Mrs. Lim and Kevin's armor. The shadow of the past, which they had overlooked or deliberately ignored, was quietly approaching them. As Mrs. Lim and Kevin accelerated the reforms at Evergreen Holdings, a shadow from the past poised to derail them quietly began to loom. It started with an old letter. One afternoon, a large, senderless envelope was delivered to Mrs. Lim's Chief of Staff's office. Following standard procedure, the Chief of Staff checked the contents. Inside the envelope were a few yellowed old letters and an old photograph. The Chief of Staff inadvertently read through the letters and was startled, her face turning ashen. It was a letter almost like a will written by Mrs. Lim's husband, Cheryl's father, just before his death decades ago. And the accompanying photograph showed her young husband with another unfamiliar woman looking affectionate. The contents of the letter were shocking. To my dearest Lim, by the time you read this letter, I will no longer be in this world. Forgive me for deceiving you my entire life. Besides you, I loved another woman. And we have a son together. The woman and the child are innocent, so I beg you, please take them in. I have separately prepared a will stating that half of all my assets are to be left to that child. Please grant my last wish. The Chief of Staff was at a loss as to how to report this. Such an enormous secret hidden within Mrs. Lim, the seemingly perfect head of Evergreen Holdings. If this information were to become public, it would undoubtedly be a massive scandal that could shake the entire group. After much deliberation, the Chief of Staff quietly handed the envelope to Mrs. Lim. Mrs. Lim's face instantly hardened upon checking the contents of the envelope, but she quickly regained her composure as if nothing had happened. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly, but no one else noticed the change. Do you know who sent this letter? The sender is unknown, so it's difficult to trace. We can only assume it's the work of the factions that were recently ousted. Understood. This matter remains between you and me. It must never reach outside. After the Chief of Staff withdrew, Mrs. Lim remained alone in her office, rereading the letter. It was a painful memory she had tried to bury her entire life. In truth, she had already known that her husband had another woman and a son. After her husband's sudden death in an accident, she had discovered a diary with the exact same contents while sorting through his belongings. She had trembled with betrayal. But thinking of her young daughter Cheryl and feeling the responsibility to protect Evergreen Holdings, she had resolved to bury all the facts deep in her heart. She meticulously concealed the existence of her husband's hidden son and the will that left half of his assets to him. Legally, a will had to be disclosed and executed within a certain period after the deceased's passing, but she had used her influence to suppress that will. All assets left by her husband were inherited solely by her and her daughter Cheryl. It was the only blemish on her life, a secret she wished no one would ever discover. Yet decades later, someone was unearthing that secret and threatening her with it. It was clearly the work of the ousted old guard digging up her past weaknesses to destabilize her. Mrs. Lim fell into deep contemplation. If this truth came out, she would be branded an immoral person who had suppressed her husband's will and monopolized the inheritance. Her reputation and authority, painstakingly built over the years, could crumble in an instant. Evergreen Holdings' reform momentum would be lost, and in the worst case, her control over the company could be jeopardized. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her past choices had returned like a boomerang aimed at her neck. She wondered if she should confide in Cheryl and Kevin, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. She didn't want to lose her image as a perfect mother and a respected mother-in-law. More than anything, she didn't want to plant ugly memories of her father in Cheryl's mind. A few days later, as Mrs. Lim had anticipated, contact came from the anonymous blackmailer. A man with a distorted voice mentioned the contents of the letter and demanded a large sum of money. He threatened to expose everything to the media if she didn't comply. Mrs. Lim calmly replied, "Very well, I will give you the money. In return, hand over the original will and all your documents." She pretended to readily agree to the blackmail, but her mind was racing. This was not a problem that could be solved simply with money. Even if she paid this time, they would continue to torment her. She had to completely sever this connection. Meanwhile, Kevin and Cheryl, unaware of any of this, were enjoying happy times. Cheryl had announced the joyous news of her pregnancy. The entire family rejoiced, and laughter filled the house once more after a long time. Kevin resolved to work even harder thinking of the child who would soon be born. Mrs. Lim, seeing her pregnant daughter's happy face, became even more resolute. She could not allow her past to ruin her daughter's and son-in-law's future, and that of her soon-to-be-born grandchild. She decided to solve this problem her own way, even if it meant treading a dangerous path that bordered on illegality. She set a time and place to exchange money with the blackmailers at a secluded warehouse by the dock, and she instructed her chief of staff to secretly prepare a few things. Her eyes shone with a cold, resolute light more intense than in any previous crisis. The letter from the past was a blade threatening her, but it was also awakening another beast that lay dormant within her. She was ready to dance on that blade to protect everything she held dear. That night, as predicted, heavy rain poured down. Mrs. Lim drove her car alone to the designated meeting place, a deserted warehouse by the docks. In her car trunk was a bag containing the large sum of cash the blackmailers had demanded. Outwardly, she appeared to be a helpless victim succumbing to blackmail, but her eyes were calm without a trace of fear. Inside the warehouse, two masked men awaited her. They were the henchmen hired by the ousted Mr. Tay. They checked the money bag Mrs. Lim had brought and sneered. Just as expected, the chairman of Evergreen Holdings is quite generous. This money will last us a lifetime. Now, as promised, hand over the original will and the documents, Mrs. Lim said coldly. One of the men pulled an old envelope from his pocket and tossed it to her. Here it is. We're done here, so we'll just quietly disappear. It was the moment the men turned to leave with the money bag. Wait. Mrs. Lim's low voice stopped them in their track. You've made one mistake. What do you mean I didn't come here to give you money? I came to catch you. As soon as Mrs. Lim finished speaking, all the warehouse doors slammed shut and were locked from the outside. Then, from the darkness in a corner of the warehouse, dozens of burly men emerged. They were the security personnel Mrs. Lim had secretly hired. The blackmailers were trapped like rats. They tried to escape in a panic, but were swiftly overpowered. Mrs. Lim approached them as they lay sprawling on the floor and said coldly, I know Mr. Tay is behind you, but he is just as foolish. To think he could bring me down with such an old trick. She picked up the will envelope that had fallen to the floor. Did you think my life could be dictated by a mere scrap of paper like this? She took out a lighter and set fire to the will. The old paper was instantly engulfed in flames, turning into black ash. The blackmailers watched in horror. It was the moment their only weapon vanished. Now you have two choices. Disappear quietly and keep your mouths shut for the rest of your lives or die by my hand. Mrs. Lim's voice was chillingly cold. Her eyes were no longer those of a benevolent businesswoman. They were the eyes of a predator, mercilessly eliminating enemies who had trespassed into her territory. The men, terrified, began to beg for their lives. At the same time, Mrs. Lim's other people raided the villa where Mr. Tay was hiding. With all evidence gone and contact with his henchmen severed, Mr. Tay was trembling with anxiety. He was on the verge of giving up everything and fleeing abroad. But his plan was foiled. He was powerlessly arrested at his villa. After everything was settled, Mrs. Lim stood alone in the empty warehouse, gazing at the remaining ashes. She had personally burned her biggest secret and weakness. But her heart was not at ease. Physical evidence had disappeared, but the truth itself had not. And she realized she couldn't keep deceiving her family forever. Returning home, Mrs. Lim summoned Kevin and Cheryl to her study. Both sensed that something serious had happened and looked at her with tense expressions. Mrs. Lim sighed deeply, then spoke with difficulty. I have a story I've kept hidden from you for a very long time. She calmly confessed everything, her husband's infidelity decades ago, the existence of a hidden son, and her own act of suppressing the will. As her confession unfolded, Kevin and Cheryl were stunned into silence. Cheryl in particular was beyond shocked. The father she remembered was the kindest and most perfect man in the world. But the fact that he had another woman and even a half-sibling completely shook the world she had believed in. It's a lie. Mom, Dad wouldn't do that. Tears streamed down Cheryl's face. Mrs. Lim took her daughter's hand and shook her head. I'm sorry. I kept it hidden my whole life because I didn't want to hurt you and because of my own selfishness. But I can't deceive you any longer. Cheryl trembled with a sense of betrayal. Betrayal by her father and betrayal by her mother, who had hidden the truth for so long. She pulled her hand away from her mother and ran into her room. Kevin was at a loss, unsure whether to follow his wife or stay by his mother-in-law's side. He felt he could understand why Mrs. Lim had made such choices, but at the same time, he was deeply worried about the pain his wife was experiencing. A heavy silence remained in the living room. For the first time in her life, Mrs. Lim had shed all her masks, revealing her most vulnerable self. She shed no tears, but her face was etched with deep sorrow and remorse. Kevin quietly approached her and said, "You must have had a difficult time, madam." His words contained no blame or resentment. They held only warm, genuine empathy, understanding the pain and loneliness she must have endured as a human being. At his words, Mrs. Lim felt the dam of emotions she had kept tightly closed for decades crumble. Tears welled up in her eyes. I must have done wrong. It was all my own greed." "No, madam. You tried to protect your family and the company in your own way. While your methods may not have been entirely right, I don't believe your intentions were wrong." Kevin decided to stand by her side. He wasn't condoning her past mistakes. Rather, he understood a woman who had carried a heavy burden alone her entire life, and he felt it was now his turn to share that burden. "From now on, I will help you. I will also talk to Cheryl and try to persuade her. And shouldn't we try to find your stepson, madam? I believe it's only right that we apologize and offer compensation for the years he lost." At Kevin's words, Mrs. Lim raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes held both surprise and deep emotion. She was truly grateful that the son-in-law she had chosen was not just a capable individual, but such a deep-thinking and wise person. The process of shedding their masks was painful, but at the end of that pain, they were finally facing an opportunity to become a true family. Of course, the journey would not be easy. Healing Cheryl's wounds and seeking out another family member whose existence they hadn't even known about would undoubtedly be challenging. But now they were no longer alone. They had found the courage to hold hands and confront the shadows of the past together. Cheryl did not leave her room for several days. She refused to speak to anyone. The betrayal by her revered father and the secret kept by her trusted mother had shattered her heart. Her husband Kevin knocked on her door several times trying to talk, but she firmly shut him out. Kevin felt pity for his wife, but dared not approach her rashly. What she needed now was time. Time to process her emotions and accept the shocking truth. He simply stayed by her side in his own way, leaving her favorite food at her door or playing quiet music for her. Mrs. Lim spent her days feeling like a sinner. Her heart ached, feeling as if her daughter's pain was all her fault. But she did not rashly ask her daughter for forgiveness. She knew that any excuses now would only cause her daughter greater pain. How many days passed like this? Cheryl, who had locked herself in her room, quietly emerged. Her face was gaunt and her eyes were swollen, but her expression was surprisingly calm. She stood before her mother and husband, who were sitting on the living room sofa. "Find him," Cheryl said softly. "Find my father's son, whether he's my older brother or younger. I need to meet him and confirm for myself." Her voice contained a resolute determination to face the truth rather than resentment. Mrs. Lim and Kevin were surprised, yet also relieved. It was a sign that she was overcoming the most difficult emotional hurdle. "Understood. I will have my people search for him as quickly as possible." Mrs. Lim immediately instructed her intelligence team to find her husband's hidden son. It was an event from decades ago, and the only clues her husband had left were a name and an approximate age in a letter. But with her network, it was not an impossible task. After some inquiries, they received news a few days later that he had been found. His name was Ben Lee. He was 4 years older than Cheryl. He was an ordinary office worker, living with his elderly mother in a small apartment. His mother, Mrs. Lim's husband's mistress, had passed away from a chronic illness a few years prior. Ben Lee had no idea he was the son of the Evergreen Holdings chairman. His mother had kept that secret her entire life, and he only knew his father as someone who had died in an accident when he was young. He was a poor but honest and diligent young man. Mrs. Lim, having heard all the facts, fell into deep thought. What should she do now? Was it truly for his benefit to suddenly approach him and tell him He was the hidden son of a Cheeble family. Perhaps living his life in ignorance would be a better choice for his peace. It was Kevin who sensed her dilemma. "Madam, it is our duty to reveal the truth. Accepting that truth and choosing how to live his life is entirely his decision. We cannot decide his life for him." Kevin's words solidified Mrs. Lim's resolve. She decided to meet Ben Lee herself. Cheryl also insisted on accompanying them. She wanted to see for herself. On the appointed day, the three of them met Ben Lee at a quiet cafe. Ben Lee, who appeared bewildered by the sudden request for a meeting, was extremely nervous to find himself sitting before the chairman of Evergreen Holdings and her family, one of Singapore's top corporate figures. Mrs. Lim spoke with difficulty. Although she had prepared herself, it was never easy to utter words that could completely overturn a young man's life. She placed the prepared documents and photographs on the table and calmly explained the entire truth. Ben Lee initially listened with an expression of disbelief. It felt unreal, like a story from a movie. But as Mrs. Lim laid out the evidence, and the face of the father he vaguely remembered from his late mother's keepsakes overlapped with the images, he slowly became confused, thinking that perhaps it was all true. His gaze turned to Cheryl sitting beside him, her eyes somehow resembling his own. Could she be his half-sister? Having finished her story, Mrs. Lim bowed her head. "For decades, out of my own selfishness, I ignored your existence. I effectively deprived you of the rights and happiness you were entitled to. I am truly sorry. I want to rectify everything now. According to your father's will, I will return all the assets that should have gone to you." She apologized sincerely. Ben Lee said nothing. His mind was in turmoil. More than the sudden revelation of being the son of a wealthy family, a profound sadness washed over him concerning his father's lifelong secret and the lonely life his mother must have endured having given birth to him. Then Cheryl, who had remained silent, spoke. "I haven't fully forgiven my father or my mother yet. Seeing you reminds me of my father's betrayal, and honestly, my heart is still uneasy. But I know you bear no fault. I also think that perhaps you and your late mother might be other victims of that era, just like my father and mother. That's why I want to apologize to you. I will apologize on behalf of my mother's mistakes. I am truly sorry." Cheryl stood up and bowed deeply to Ben Lee. Hot tears streamed down her face. They were complex tears, mixed with resentment, hatred, pity, and guilt. Her sincere apology seemed to gradually melt Ben Lee's hardened heart. He felt a deep resonance in his half-sister's willingness to apologize on behalf of her mother without any blame towards him. He slowly shook his head. "No, please don't apologize. It's not your place to apologize." Then he turned to Mrs. Lim and said, "I will not accept the inheritance you offered, madam. I have lived by my own strength until now, and I wish to continue doing so. I don't want to change my life because of money I never knew existed." His answer surprised everyone. In his steadfastness, even with immense wealth before him, Kevin saw a stubborn pride similar to his own. "However, there is one thing I would like to ask. Tell me. I will grant whatever it is. Could we sometimes meet like this and perhaps share a meal? I only had my mother as family, but now I have a sister?" Ben Lee looked at Cheryl and smiled faintly. That smile seemed to melt the last icy shard that had burdened Cheryl's heart. She smiled back. "It is said that forgiveness is not for someone else, but ultimately for oneself." They had confronted the wounds of the past head-on and extended their hands to each other. Under the banner of true forgiveness, the shattered pieces of their family slowly but surely began to reassemble. Although many challenges still lay ahead, they were now ready to walk that path together. After the meeting with Ben Lee, a significant change came over Mrs. Lim's family. In the process of exposing and comforting their festering wounds, they were bound by an even stronger bond than before. Cheryl called Ben Lee older brother and met with him regularly. Although awkward at first, the fact that they shared the same blood quickly brought them closer. Kevin, too, genuinely rejoiced at gaining a brother-in-law and warmly embraced him as a member of the family. Mrs. Lim, upon Ben Lee's refusal of the inheritance, decided to help him in a different way. She began to sponsor him through the Evergreen Philanthropic Fund under her personal name, not the group's. Ben Lee initially rejected this too, but Mrs. Lim's earnest plea, "This is also a way for you to accept my apology, so please do not refuse," finally opened his heart. With the foundation's support, he decided to resume his dream of studying architecture. Having restored peace to her family, Mrs. Lim could now fully focus on the reforms at Evergreen Holdings. She championed transparent and ethical management as her top priorities, systematically eradicating the company's outdated practices. Under her bold and innovative leadership, Evergreen Holdings was rapidly transforming. Kevin's performance as the head of the Future Strategy Business Division was remarkable. He successfully led the AI process improvement project, significantly enhancing the group's productivity, and also began to achieve notable results in the biotechnology and renewable energy sectors. The label of chairman's son-in-law gradually faded, and he firmly established himself as the next-generation leader who would drive the group's future. He was no longer a weak young man, reliant on his mother-in-law's shadow. Through numerous trials, he had become stronger, and was now proving himself with his own abilities and vision. Mrs. Lim proudly watched her son-in-law's growth, gradually entrusting him with more authority and responsibility. This was not merely trust in a family member, but a shrewd managerial decision recognizing his capabilities. As time passed, Cheryl gave birth to a healthy son. The child's arrival was a great blessing for the entire family. Mrs. Lim beamed with joy every day, delighted to be a grandmother for the first time, and Kevin, holding his son, felt like he had everything in the world. On the day of the baby's 100th day celebration, the entire family gathered at Mrs. Lim's house for the first time in a long while. Mrs. Lim, Kevin, and Cheryl, and even Ben Lee, who was now a proud member of the family. They shared a meal, delighted in the baby's playful antics, and filled the air with laughter. In that peaceful and happy scene, the stormy years they had endured seemed like a distant memory. After dinner, Mrs. Lim called Kevin to her study. She handed him an old key. "This is the master key to this study." Kevin looked at her with a bewildered expression. "I think it's time for me to step down. We need a new captain to steer this massive ship that is Evergreen Holdings, and that captain must be you." It was, in effect, a transfer of management. Kevin, taken aback by the sudden proposal, waved his hands in protest. "Madam, no chairperson, I am still not ready. There is still so much I need to learn from you." Mrs. Lim smiled gently and took his hand. "No, you have already proven yourself sufficiently. You have eyes that can see further and wider oceans than I can. My role now is merely to be an old lighthouse keeper, watching from behind to ensure you don't lose your way." She was sincere. Her role was complete: to cut out the rot and create fertile ground for new shoots to grow. Now it was the next generation's turn to cultivate those shoots into mighty trees. "I have no intention of inheriting the company. However, if you need me, I will do my best to assist you by your side, madam, for as long as needed." Kevin's answer was firm. He had no desire to be the owner of Evergreen Holdings. He simply wished to develop the company through his abilities in his own position. Mrs. Lim, realizing his sincerity, did not press further. Instead, she thought of a wiser approach. A few days later, Evergreen Holdings announced the full implementation of a professional management system. The chairman's position would remain largely symbolic, with actual management entrusted to a board of directors comprised of experts in various fields, and Mr. Kevin Tan, head of the Future Strategy Business Division, was appointed as the new chairman of this board. It was Mrs. Lim's final reform initiative, designed to separate ownership from management and make the company more transparent and efficient. Kevin accepted the position. It was not a title of absolute power, but a role demanding greater responsibility and service. He was no longer merely Mrs. Lim's successor, but a new leader working for all employees and shareholders of Evergreen Holdings. A new voyage had already begun. On the course charted by Mrs. Lim, the young captain Kevin Tan began to steer the massive ship of Evergreen Holdings towards wider horizons. No one knew what storms might lie ahead, but now they were not afraid, for they had a strong family who trusted and relied on each other, and colleagues with a burning passion for change working together. They were ready to write a new history together. Seasons changed a few more times, and the world flowed peacefully. Evergreen Holdings achieved remarkable growth under the leadership of Chairman of the Board Kevin Tan. Shedding its old image, it completely transformed into a global corporation, leading in cutting-edge technology and innovation. Kevin was a capable yet humble leader. He always listened to the voices from the field, and he fostered a horizontal organizational culture by mingling freely with employees. Mrs. Lim fully retired from active management and was honored as honorary chairman. She no longer interfered with company affairs. Instead, she dedicated her remaining passion to the activities of the Evergreen Philanthropic Fund, caring for the disadvantaged corners of society. Her greatest joy became strolling through the park with her grandson, or preparing meals for her family with vegetables she grew herself in her garden. The charismatic matriarch who once commanded the business world was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the image of an ordinary grandmother with a gentle, warm smile. Cheryl returned to the gallery and continued her career as a curator. The wounds of the past had matured her. She found stability within the new family circle, her husband, son, mother, and brother, realizing her self-worth through her work, and living happier days than ever before. Ben Lee, having completed his architecture studies with the foundation's support, began to make a name for himself as a talented, emerging architect. He showed particular interest in public architecture for the underprivileged. His first project was a small shelter for single mothers and their children. Thinking of his own mother who had raised him alone throughout her life, he designed the space with the hope that all mothers and children in the world would be protected in a warm and safe environment. On the opening day of the shelter, Mrs. Lim, Cheryl, and Kevin all attended, sincerely congratulating him. Though they shared blood but had lived in different worlds, they were now each other's strongest supporters, cheering on one another's lives. One sunny weekend afternoon, the entire family gathered in Mrs. Lim's spacious garden. Kevin's son was toddling around, running on the lawn, and the family watched him with fond smiles, filling the air with laughter. The outdoor table, carefully set, was laden with delicious food Mrs. Lim had personally prepared. Just like the day everything began, Mrs. Lim had made braised ribs for her son-in-law, but the meaning embedded in that dish had now changed. If it had originally been a feeling of pity and worry, it now held pride, gratitude, and deep love. Kevin was giving his son a piggyback ride playing airplane in the garden. The child's bright laughter echoed high into the sky. Watching them, Cheryl quietly approached her mother and took her hand. "Thank you, Mum." "For what, my dear?" "For everything. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be smiling like this right now." Mrs. Lim silently stroked her daughter's hair. A gentle smile played at the corners of her eyes. "No, if it weren't for you two, I would have grown old alone in the darkness of the past. You have given me light." The two mother and daughter smiled, looking at each other in silence. All the walls that had separated them for so long had crumbled, and only warm affection remained between them. After playing for a while, Kevin returned to the table carrying his sleeping son. Mrs. Lim picked up a piece of warm braised rib and put it into her son-in-law's mouth. "You work so hard, my dear son-in-law." "Not at all, madam. Thanks to you, I am living so happily," Kevin said. Mrs. Lim shook her head. "No, happiness is not given by anyone. It is something you create with your own strength. You overcame everything with your own power and bravely claimed happiness for yourself and your family. I merely lit a small lamp to keep you from losing your way." They said nothing more, but their eyes conveyed everything in their hearts. A meeting that began with fury, a period of turmoil through countless crises and conflicts. Having navigated all those storms together, they had finally become a true family, indispensable to each other. As the sun set warm, string lights lit up the garden. The child fell asleep in his father's arms, and the adults shared glasses of wine, conversing softly. Ordinary, yet immeasurably precious happiness enveloped them. Mrs. Lim gently stroked her sleeping grandson's plump cheek and thought. Life, she mused, was ultimately like a carefully prepared meal. Sometimes one had to trim bitter ingredients and endure long hours over a hot fire and unexpectedly even ruin a dish. But if one never forgot the most important seasoning, love, and sincerity, in the end one would complete a warm and delicious meal that everyone could share. The long story that began with a single bento box she prepared now resided as a warm presence at a family dining table. And that warmth would continue to be the strongest force protecting their lives for a long time to come.